Welcome to SAS, a podcast where science meets spirituality with a little bit of sass, your guide to awakening with a twist. I'm Katie Kovaleski, your host, and I look forward to helping you on your awakening journey. I've been a marriage and family therapist for almost 11 years and have been specializing in holistic self-care tools for the last 5. I've found that healing and growth are optimized when mind, body, and spirit tools are combined with cognitive behavior and solution-focused therapeutic techniques, creating sustainable change that can be easy and fun. All of our podcasts discuss science and spirituality and really talk about tools and topics that are imperative to the human awakening experience. We look forward to meeting you wherever you are, and welcome to SAS. So welcome to today's episode. And this episode was recorded in July of 2020 and took place during Katie's visit to Michigan over the summer for 8 weeks, where I was living with my mom in a small cottage on a lake. And at the time, we had not spent a prolonged period of time together since we kind of came face to face with our codependency framework that we discovered in February. So it was a really interesting time, and this episode was recorded during the first week that we were there, when I started to notice that there was some underlying tension or blocks or emotion going on, and decided to address that with her. So prior to recording this episode, the day prior, I had chosen to step into willingness of vulnerability and address what I had been feeling was going on. And it led to a really interesting, candid, honest, and growth mindset conversation that really kind of opened up the pathway for us having like a really great, honest, and vulnerable summer together. So also in this episode, we refer to some of the stages of awakening, specifically stage 2 is mentioned. And so for those of you who haven't listened to all of the episodes, I'm going to briefly cover now what those stages of spiritual awakening are, so that you can follow along and it'll make sense for this. So the stages of spiritual awakening include stage 1, emotional rock bottom, stage 2, becoming aware, stage 3, the hermit or cocoon phase, and stage 4, the rebirth. And this episode is a really good example of what can happen when we stay open and curious in an especially vulnerable conversation topic. So when we resist the urge to want to jump in and talk someone out of how they're feeling because what they're feeling might make us uncomfortable. And when we are able to kind of bite our tongues and let the conversation develop, regardless of how uncomfortable we might get at times, if we can own that part of ourselves and let the other person flow and be able to really express how they feel without interruption, it can take on a really interesting life of its own. And that's when I think the most authentic exchanges occur. So enjoy this episode and leave us any feedback that you have. So I was thinking yesterday about our last conversation and about so yesterday we were talking about the stages of waking up, becoming woke, and like frustration with people not understanding what stage they're at. And then I realized I needed to have that conversation with my mom. So I thought it would be interesting to kind of talk about how we navigate difficult topics with our parents and like why that's super important. So after we had talked, I went and had initiated the uncomfortable, vulnerable conversation and then felt like the effects of it until like this morning, but didn't really realize why. And so it was really interesting because I think on a few days ago, I posted something about people fighting on Facebook about wearing masks and how a lot of that I think stems from them having the desire to do the right thing, but there's like no right thing because there's so much information, and how I think it really comes from just like a fear of dying, and it's like the thing that no one can avoid it. It's a thing that happens to all of us, but it's discussed like the littlest. Like people don't really talk about death and dying except to be afraid of it or be like, oh God, I don't want to lose that person or that's awful, and I just find that so weird because it's the one thing we're all going to do, and it's like we understand it the least. And so when I was thinking about, I don't know, a few weeks ago about Lucy, the dog dying, and wanting to be able to like support her in that, you know. And it's the most like interesting and weird feeling or thought or idea to think about wanting to support someone and like walk them home to like leaving this body, right? And it brings up all kinds of emotion. And because no one's ever taught me how to do that in this conscious human body. And for some reason I felt over the last few years that I want to get really good at that, like really comfortable with it and feel peaceful about it and feel that I'm like a good advocate and have the skill set to be able to help someone with that journey and feel grounded in it. And so yesterday, when I went to talk to my mom, who just seems like wound up and not quite, in, you know, connecting with her true self, and she was talking about, I was waiting for her. So we're up here in Michigan, right? And the place we're staying at originally was her grandmother's and then her mom's and now hers. And this is the first summer that her mom hasn't been here because she passed away in August. And she hasn't mentioned her once the whole time we've been here. And I know it's been on her mind. And so I just, part of me was a little bit resentful and being like, why doesn't she just address how she feels with herself and then be like open with talking about it? And so I gave her that opening and I just said, if there's anything you ever want to say or about how you feel, I hope you can address it within yourself and then say it out loud, as opposed to waiting for an opening, like waiting for a disagreement or something to come up so that you can let out the emotion that you're just carrying, because I can feel it just coming off of you, you know? And I don't entirely know if that point was lost on her or not, but like we had talked about earlier, I've done that in the past, waited for those openings to come up to be able to finally let out whatever I'd been feeling. And so right when I said that, she just like starts bawling. And I'm like, well, there it is. You know, and I'm like, it's right below the surface all the time. You don't have to just carry it and you wait for these openings. And she said, you know, I do cry, I have been letting it out, but you know, I've been dealing with like grief and death my whole life and it's awful. I had this urge to be like, okay, that's just a story you told yourself. It doesn't have to be awful. Like, and it was really, and I had repetitive thoughts like that that I had to check the entire time she was talking because I wanted to talk her out of what she was saying so badly and be like, no, it doesn't have to be like that. But I just listened, and she said, you know, now that my mom's gone, I'm, you know, I just feel totally alone. And I was like, and I wanted to be like, that's not true. What are you talking about? Like, why would you tell yourself that? And instead I was like, well, what do you mean by that? I'm not understanding what you mean by totally alone. And she said, she was the last person in my family that I'm close to that knew my history, that like watched me grow up, you know, and that was something that I hadn't really thought about what that would be like. And she said, you know, I've watched the people that like I loved the most, or some of the people I loved the most, die the longest, slowest deaths. And that's true. And my grandmother, you know, died a long death. And my mom's brother had MS and like all kinds of health issues. And he was on the verge of death for like years and years. And my mom, you know, took care of him. And she was like, and that was really hard watching them, you know, suffer. But then she also said, and I miss caretaking them, which I found really interesting. I feel like my mom's sister was the opposite. She was almost like waiting for them to die because she knew they were suffering and it made her suffer to have to watch that. And my mom, what she misses the most right now is taking care of somebody, even if they're suffering. So it was like a very interesting like juxtaposition, her being like, the people I, you know, love the most, they suffered for so long and that was awful. And like now I don't know what my role is, you know. And she said, this is the part that like really struck me. And she said, and it wasn't until my mom died that I realized what age I am and that now I have to figure out how I want to spend like the, you know, third trimester of my life and like really think about the things I want to do or still see. And like, and that just fucking killed me because I was like, how often do people sit down with their parents and talk to them, or have the parent be like, you know, I'm in this third trimester now and I'm really aware of that and I had never been aware of it before and now I need to figure out like how I want my life to play out, you know. I'm like, fuck, that's heavy.
Yeah.
You know, did you ever talk to your mom about that?
No. My mom, talk about a slow, painful death. She had early onset Alzheimer's. And it's the one thing she would always talk about when I was growing up because three of her sisters and her mother had the same thing. So she's like, this is the one thing I fear most in life is to get this. And she got it.
How
And
early did that? start?
when she was like 55.
Really?
Yeah. So, and it's not lost on me that I'm getting close to that.
Was it, did she have any brothers?
Yeah. So I'm sorry, two sisters. She has three sisters and four brothers.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And two of the sisters got it. Her mom got it. Um, I don't think any of her brothers got it.
Yeah. I was just wondering when you said that if it was like somehow correlated to.
Yeah. But, I have her genes. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. I know my sister's really worried about it, but yeah, so I didn't really talk about it because she was just scared and sad when she was realizing that it was happening.
Yeah.
And I think she was in denial with it for a while. And then it just got so bad that she was gone. And then I was in Florida and she was in Kentucky. So it wasn't, a few times I would talk to her on the phone. I was like, hey, let's talk about that.
Yeah. So when she kind of knew that it was starting or that it might be coming, did she talk about like how she wanted things to be in her life after that point?
No.
Yeah.
She, yeah, every time she would start to talk about it, she would just cry. So, and then she would just move on.
Yeah.
So she never really processed that.
Yeah. So even like with that, she kind of knew that when it was starting, her like date point was a little bit different or younger. And it's like having those conversations, like it's fucking hard, but I think probably really important. And I think it puts like the parent and the child in such opposite roles and requires this like really different, I think, just like openness maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And like, because you're holding space for them to feel something that's like, however it makes them feel, while like trying to process and let your own feelings about it come through, but not like overshadow it. And it's a really weird dynamic. But I was really glad we had the conversation because and like, with Alzheimer's too, her dad and both of his brothers, they didn't have early onset. It onset in like their mid 70s. I mean, I think they each may have lasted like 5 years into it, if that. So I know that's on her mind too.
Yeah.
But she isn't afraid to die, she said, and I believe that. She just had never considered that she was older, that she was almost 70. And so it was just different watching that and then wanting to, I guess what struck me and that I'm trying to like step into a new way of looking at a new perception is allowing her to be like whoever she wants to be for this last whatever it is. And I don't know what that is. And like just being, super supportive. And I just keep thinking of the movie Benjamin Button. And at the end, she's like, Brad Pitt's like an infant, and she's like older and she's taking care of him. And that's like what I think kind of happens. And so I'm really trying to, the best that I can, like reverse engineer a parenting process that's like, let's these 30 years, that's what it feels like these 30 years you have, like you can do whatever you want and be whoever you want and like go feed ducks every day if that's what lights you up, and like finger paint. I don't, those are all like childlike activities, but whatever it was, like where in the world have you not been that you want to go? And like, and I just think that to me feels like the nicest way to sort of be able to welcome in or walk into like leaving this body in a really like peaceful, respectful way. It just made me like not want to avoid that. I think a lot of people avoid having those conversations and thinking about it. And I just feel like part of the next step of being awake for me is getting really comfortable with that, really comfortable with it. And I know that because it makes me uncomfortable. Right. So and I had thought about it before, because she said she felt alone, and she was like, and part of that was again because she lost the people who knew her stories knew her when she was growing up. And then she mentioned sort of in passing, like, and maybe having whether or not the next trimester holds having a partner or, getting remarried or whatever. And I think for me, it really hit me because one of one of the only reasons I ever wanted to get married or have a lifelong partner was so that I would have someone to go through people dying with. And I had never really, and I knew that I had admitted it in my head, like, oh, what would be the benefit of, what would be like the strong draw of wanting to be with this person forever? And it would be like, I literally would think, well, I found immense comfort in knowing that, like, when the day comes that, like, I have to bury my mother, that I would have this person, like, next to me, which
Right.
my ego mind must be like, that's not a good reason to get married. But that was like what I was thinking. I was thinking, what would be the hardest time of my life? We absorbed that sort of structure and modeling from our parents. And my mom was like, I knew this would be, losing my mother would be different than losing my dad. And it would be so hard because I watched how my mom felt and what happened to her when she lost her mom. And immediately I'm like, well, that's just conditioning. And I realized that I had taken on some of that too. How can I make it easier for myself when that time comes? Oh, I'll have this like partner to lean on. And I want to deconstruct that for myself, because just because it was difficult for my grandmother, or however that experience was for her, doesn't mean that it has to be the same for my mom. It doesn't mean it has to be the same for me. So for me, if I do ever decide to be with somebody long term or forever, it's not going to be because I want it to be easier when my mom dies. And I really needed to confront that. And so I did, and then realized that there's like, I have so many great relations. Like, I'm not worried about that timing, but that for me, it's rewriting what death and dying and losing a parent means, and deciding for myself. And I don't entirely know what that will be like, but I do know that aiding in like her process of her, like, walking home is something that, and with my dad too. And I think he and I are already doing that. And I think we're just doing it in a much different way. And so I don't know, like it opened up a lot of things that had made me uncomfortable. And I know that part of my path unfolding is getting really comfortable with restoring and reconditioning death and dying to make sure it's in alignment with everything I already believe, and then helping others walk through that. So it's not this like brutal grieving process. And so it was cool. It's cool because we were talking about yesterday, when being awake and walking through the different stages of awakening, whether you're at your rock bottom or you're even unaware, just starting to become aware that you have an ego, being in a cocoon phase or being like reborn, you always kind of vacillate as you go through different transitions in those different phases. And so, like, on Sunday, I wrote about death and dying. Didn't really think twice about it after that, but it thought twice about me, and just was like rearing, like begging to be looked at yesterday. And I felt all this anger, was definitely living in like stage 2, did not know why. And then the conversation with her happened, started about one thing and turned into that. And I was like, oh, that's what you get for opening up that seed, being like, oh, I want to, because I really have thought recently, like, when it comes to death and dying and letting go, about becoming, I know I planted the seed of like, I want to get much better and get good at being able to do that and help people with that. And like, here it is. So yeah, but with that, it's just always so interesting to me, no matter how awake we become, that when new things come up, we come against our old conditioning. So I still have some of that old conditioning of death, of like mourning somebody is awful and so sad, and you miss them all the time, and it's heart wrenching, and it's such an ending. With like my new conditioning and new knowledge of like, nothing ever ends, and like, you can always talk to their spirit and they're in everything. And it's just leaving this body, that the spirit's eternal. So it's just interesting as like I move through life to come up against the old versus the new, and remind myself to shift into it and find so much comfort in the new conditioning and the new understanding. And that was what happened when I was annoyed with my mom for the way she behaved at coffee talk. And that's what I got out of addressing it. Something way different than I started with.
Very nice. Isn't that how it always ends up though? Like when you finally start delving into any kind of problem, like by the end of it, you're like, I don't recognize where we started.
Well, that's
Like,
like the hallmark of like a good conversation. Otherwise, like,
right? Yeah, yeah, true. I think it's a beautiful thing. I envy you and your mother that you are at the stage you are in your journey, and you're going to be able to help her go through hers. Your mom talking about what am I going to do in my last trimester. My mom was, it was kind of scary. She was in Spain when it kind of really, like, I think she could probably tell, but she was hiding it, so no one could really tell. And of course, I'm like 1,000 miles away from her. She was in Spain with her students, and she got really confused. Her students end up taking off back to America without her. She ends up in Munich somehow and can't get a hold of her. Yeah, and
what?
this is for, yeah, iPhones and all that kind of
They
stuff.
just left her there?
No, it was just weird because I mean she's the one in charge, so she gets them all on the plane or whatever, and something happened, and she was just had a moment and got confused and missed that plane, and then ended up in Germany. Then just was bouncing all over the place. Like, are we ever going to get our mom back? And I just felt totally helpless, and I felt guilty too because she really wanted me to go on that trip with her, and I'm wondering it's because she knew she probably needed some help, and
Mm.
she, looking back on it, I kind of figured this out. And of course I didn't, because I was married to somebody who just would not have that. It's like,
Right.
hey, I'm not going to Spain if I can't go to Spain. So I felt guilty about that. And I was like, now my mom's like bouncing all over Europe. Don't know if she's ever going to get home. And, and then she having to wrestle with, well, that's it. That's it. So I just got my third trimester robbed from me. Like,
Yeah.
that's done. I don't get to do this. I don't get to plan on anything because it's over.
Yeah.
Going into like a depressive. She was really good at, like, you could tell she was sad, but she was really good at like just pushing it all down and hiding it. And it's like I can be this for other people, but I'm just carrying on this with me. And then of course me being where I was in a deep depressive state, I'm like, well, I have no idea how to deal with this. So I feel again guilt, and then feel like I failed her at that time. And I'm grateful for you and your mother that you are where you're at right now.
Thanks. I
Yeah.
was just thinking too, like, you know, a couple of things. One, if we all have soul agreements with the people that are in our lives, like your mom's soul and spirit, like agreed to that life, right? For whatever reason. And it was supposed to happen that way. And you have like an opportunity here to almost like do that with Becky, you know? And so it's like surrogacy in that way. So it provides like healing for you and for your mom and the universe. And, it doesn't always have to be, if events play out on this physical plane a certain way, that the healing has to be with that person, but it can come from other people, and being able to do that. So when you're talking about your mom pressing everything down, being like really good at putting it on for other people, but like still carrying all that stuff with her. That's like literally what I said to Becky yesterday. I was like, if you're ready to cry just when someone says something that gives you that invitation, you don't have to carry that around with you all the time.
Yeah.
Like, you just don't. And that's something, if I can help her with one thing, and it's not that I'm going to carry it for her, it's just helping her release it. And so I know how to do that. And so you said it might be that your mom asked you on that trip because she kind of knew something was happening. I'm seeing like opportunities to be able to help her not carry those things or release them like in small ways all the time. So it's like if she's like, oh, are we going to do a journaling exercise this summer? And I'm like, maybe. And I was like distracted, right? Well, like, no, I'm like for sure shit going to do that now. It's like the person will ask in their own way. And then if the alignment is right, where we're able to meet them there, and like pay attention to that. And I like am grateful for you telling those stories, because I'm just starting to realize that, like, almost childlike, where they're not really going to ask. I saw a quote or something recently. I think Iris posted it, that was like, a child doesn't have like the communication skills to say like, I'm anxious or I've had a hard day. They're going to say like, will you play with me? Can we? And that's what she does, Becky. Like, will you play with me? And I'm like, oh, maybe. And so I'm like, okay, it's reverse parenting. So it's learning. We also had to talk about her communication style, and that like the cutesy, like kind of playing confused or dumb, and how if you play that game enough, and then when you really are confused or you need help, you might be met with a lot less patience because the person is like, are you playing a game with me or do you actually need help with this? And so
Right.
that was helpful. And then her being able to communicate for the first time. I'm a visual learner. And so I have to actually see it and have you tell me what you're doing while you're physically doing it step by step for me to be able to like understand it. And I'm like, that's all you have to say. So it's just kind of rechecking our communication and like meeting someone where they are as opposed to just expecting them to like get it. So it's like ground up, but very interesting. But like, yeah, they'll give you little seeds, but it might not necessarily be like the adult version of like, hey, I'm struggling. I need to talk about this. It's like, can we go for a walk? You know? So yeah, if you're down, like you can go on this journey too, and we will learn how to walk people home.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's super important. I feel like this is depressing.
Yeah, I'm like, just
Yeah.
recommend. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that especially when someone's gone, maybe it becomes easier to just avoid. You don't have to like in order to process or whatever, bring up whatever's still there. You literally have to walk to it. You have to be like, okay, I choose this, and a lot of people just don't, and they don't know how, and so like yesterday, well, I guess I chose it over the weekend, but I like had no idea. I was like, I'm gonna go on just a fun, relaxing vacation, and I'm just like getting slapped around. So I think choosing it, like with anything, instead of waiting for that fire to take over your house, like you choose when to ignite it and make it a controlled burn and let it be healing.
Yeah. Like you say, some people just don't know how. Like even if they want to do that, they don't know how to do it. And just thinking about my dad, my sister has so much anger towards my dad for the way he handled my mom towards the end. And he just he doesn't know how to process emotion. He never went and saw my mom. When my mom had to go into a full-time assisted facility for the last 3 years of her life, he never went and saw her. And it just drove my sister crazy, saying he doesn't care for her, whatever. And I've been trying to talk to her about it. I was like, he doesn't know. He probably feels a lot of shame the way he handled her at the very end before she had to go. Her having to go just means he failed. He does not process death at all. I remember I was so pissed at him when my uncle was dying. We were in his room, and they gave him a sedative, and he was out, and we are just like waiting for him to die. And my dad got mad at my grandmother and said, "Let's just get the fuck out of here, or whatever." I was like, "That's her kid dying, you
Yeah.
know." But that's what he does. He just acts like a 5 year old basically when it comes to that. I was like, "You just don't have the tools. You have no idea. You have so much." He's such an emotional person and has no idea how to process it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just felt so bad for my grandmother at that time, because he made her leave.
Oof.
She didn't get to sit there, and he was totally absorbed in himself. And so I understand where my sister's coming from, but at the same time, like my dad loved my mom. He wasn't like forget her and then went running out. He still pines for her day. He has her pictures all over the place. He doesn't want to be with anyone else. Yeah, it would just be nice. And now his mom has died too. So I don't know. I was about to say, so it's too late, but it's not too late. I guess I can still teach him how to like help him a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I think we'll figure it out like with anything, like as we go and kind of get better at it. But it's that compassion of just understanding like he might have just been so overwhelmed he didn't know what to do, but he did know how to like run. And it's just like anything's got to be better than standing here and watching this and
Mm-hmm.
then apply to all. So I'm gonna make her leave too, because
Yep.
there's no way she'd want to be here. Cause it's that like stages of being unawake, thinking
Yep.
that what you're feeling is what everybody needs, or not even being able to consider at the same time. And I felt some of that come up for me yesterday, and I just wanted so badly to be like, why do you believe that you're alone, and like that's ridiculous, and like you know, I had a whole like all these different pathways of conversation. Me at first thinking like, well, that's selfish as fuck because like your kids are here and like are super close to you. So why the fuck would you feel alone? Like that's offensive to me. Like that's egoic going into being like, that's just not true. Why would you live under that belief system? It's like so limiting to going
Mhm.
into being like, yeah, she's upset right now. And she's not gonna be able to like absorb any of the things you're saying as far as like belief systems go. So just sit here and let her like talk, you know? And it was
Right.
like really, I was like sitting there being like, and then just being like, okay, because it's like you don't want that person to be in pain, so you just want them to shut up, or you want them to stop looking at the way they do, and it's like you can't. And what you're really saying is, I don't want to be in pain, and it hurts me to watch this happen, but you just gotta fucking do it. And so that's what I think the first step is, and having difficult conversations is being like, if something's drawing you to it and it's making you uncomfortable, open up, write about it. You'll welcome an opportunity to talk about it that you didn't even know you wanted. And then take the opportunity to have the uncomfortable conversation, like be willingly vulnerable, like initiate it, and then sit in it and don't respond. So like assume that all of your initial responses that are popping into your head are probably defense mechanisms and old conditioning, and don't respond to any of them. And then from there, because every time you do, it throws up a wall and it stops the
Mhm.
conversation, or you can just circle in front of it. So if you can allow those initial reactions to dissipate, then the conversation will take a path that you might have never seen coming. But it's just being aware. And I think that's a big part of being awake, is that
Yeah.
even when you're awake, I think to me, being awake means you understand the process of how change works. You understand that everyone creates their own reality, that they're always responding. And if they're reactionarily responding, it's like a projection or reflection of them. You know, their opinion is only their opinion. It only reflects their reality based on their old conditioning and their current mood and whatever's going on, that it's not applicable to all, that there's no generalizations, there's no blanket statements. Everybody lives in their own version of reality. And that you'll constantly be fluctuating between the states of once awake, like old conditioning, which is your ego rearing up, cocooning, needing to take time away and like really let things sink in, and then being reborn again. And I think it'll happen in every area, major area of life, not all at the same time. So, like, I would consider myself to have gone through quite a few transformations, have a pretty good grasp on like the system of change and how reality is created and being awake, and then still having those steps of the process rear up when I'm walking into something that currently makes me uncomfortable, and
Mhm.
having to literally stop myself from responding, knowing that's the first one's always going to be ego. You know, the second one is like the desire to fix and rescue, and then comes like the state of just being present, and then from there the conversation goes where it needs to. So like it's, you know, it's ever evolving, but it gets easier. But yeah, I just think this is where the practice begins, you know.
Right. You just This is what you do. You just said very well what I was trying to say the other day. Well, talking about our last conversation, that it's whatever you see on Facebook and everything is those people just the back and forth and this the digging in the heels. And I was talking about that person that like I didn't, we were started at the opposite sides of, you know, how we're like, hey, I'm over here, and you're like, I'm over here. I know you want to punch me in the face or whatever. And then she admitted she just because she wanted to punch me in the face for the things I was saying, and then we just end up and without me just letting her talk and having to push down. I was like, okay, just don't respond to that. Just let her keep talking or whatever, and let her just process through that. We just ended up in the same space anyway. And then I was like, see, we're saying the same things. We were just going in the wrong, or opposite directions with it. You said what I was trying to say the other day, and I see it. And it's just funny that we ended up here because this is why I can't scroll down more than 5 posts on Facebook and then I'm out. Because this is all it is. And like you said, it's like it's part of being awake. And you just look and it's like no one's awake. Everyone's asleep. Everybody's screaming in their sleep.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what that post was about. And then it turned into a post about, I literally was just writing the post to kind of like vent about how scrolling on Facebook, if I do it for a couple of days, if I violate my own rule, which is like don't scroll, within a couple of days, I'm reminded why. And I feel
Mhm.
so icky and low vibrational and just like, ugh. And so I didn't even realize when I started venting about it that that was going to end up being the death, coming around to like fear of death.
Right.
But it did. And then kind of helped clear up like about what being awake means and how so many people misuse it. And that'll be a separate podcast too. Because I started asking people, what they thought of being awake and what that really meant, and got all these different answers. One person said like taking the red pill, so like Matrix style, where like now you'll see the truth. But even that truth is just like a presentation of it. Everybody could be seeing the same thing and have 100 different perceptions of it.
Mhm.
So it's all relative. And like I loved what Kayla said yesterday. It's all relative, and everybody thinks they're doing the right thing. Nobody's like, no, I'm evil. I mean, maybe some people are, but like very few. You know,
Right.
they feel justified and validated, and they have evidence, and like they feel moved based on their level of consciousness to do what they're doing. And if their level of consciousness is really constricted, then they are dangerous to people because they don't know what they don't know, and they have no idea that there's anything to know.
When she said that, I just had a visualization of you have a mask in your hand, you're holding it up, and what you're seeing right before you put the mask on, you're seeing the hero mask. You're not seeing what's on the other side, it's the villain mask. You
Yeah.
never see it. You put the hero mask on, you think, oh, I'm the hero. On the other side, everybody's seeing the villain.
Yeah. It's like when they say people go to war, there's religious wars. Each side thinks God is with them. They're fighting for God. God wants us to do this.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Each one, so it's like
Right.
it's always been that way. And things are just becoming so shook up right now that it's good that there's so much misinformation and disinformation and like on all sides, because it just exposes how relative all of it is. Like anybody can put out there whatever they want, and there's always going to be evidence for it. And the part of being awake is following like what your spirit says, your soul, your intuition. And the leap of faith that it requires means that you won't look for evidence anywhere else other than the way you feel about it, like in your gut, and you act on that. And I think at its core, that's what all of this is there to teach people. And it's sort of, for the ones who've been asleep and who haven't done the work, it's rapid fire right now. And I'm sure it feels incredibly overwhelming and anxiety provoking because they're used to relying on outside information and validation to decide what to do next. And there's so much conflicting energy and resources and sources out there that they don't know what to do. And they're going to have to eventually just succumb to the idea that they have to look within and understand that they create their own reality, and you don't need to consume anything external to be able to know what to do next. But, I feel some detached empathy for it. I know it needs to happen. But I also know, even talking with my dad and introducing some of these ideas to him, that for somebody who's like a man of faith, and by man of faith, I mean someone who goes to Catholic church every week, at least once a week for his entire life, feels sort of, I think, helpless in it, and anxiety ridden about it. And we'll definitely have a full episode on that, but it's just fascinating to me that people of faith may not even understand what faith looks like. Yeah, so for all the people who hadn't started the path and hadn't done any work, and for me, that means they don't have tools to be able to calm themselves, and not just calm themselves, but grow forward from it. Yeah, they're all hitting their rock bottom at the same time. And better now than never. I'm Katie Kovaleski, and you've been listening to the SAS podcast, where science meets spirituality with a sassy twist. You can follow the SAS podcast through Instagram, Facebook, and our website using the links in the show notes. If you haven't yet, go to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube and subscribe. If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave a review. If you would like to continue this conversation, visit our blog to join in on the deep dive for this episode where we explore this topic in more detail. Join me next week for another sassy conversation.